It began as a typical November evening, or so I thought. The call came in around midnight from a worried roommate, a missing college student who hadn't returned home. Her name was Drew Shatton, 22 years old, a University of North Dakota student. She had finished her shift at the mall hours earlier, but never showed up at her second job. The roommate mentioned strange phone calls with Drew's boyfriend, Chris. My gut told me this wasn't just a case of a distracted college student. The first thing we did was check the parking lot at the mall where she worked. Her car was still there, parked neatly in its usual spot. The doors were unlocked, and there was no sign of struggle, no broken glass, no scattered belongings. But something stood out. A knife sheath lying on the ground nearby. It felt out of place, almost staged. I radioed in to request backup and began combing the area. By morning, the campus police and city authorities were fully involved. Surveillance cameras in the mall were our next lead. Hours of footage awaited, showing Drew moving through the mall after her shift, casually shopping for Christmas gifts. She didn't appear distressed, no one following her, at least not at first glance. But then came the revelation. There, lingering in the background, was a man dressed in black, walking with a cane. He appeared in multiple clips, moving through the mall without purpose, watching. Each time Drew appeared, he wasn't far behind. The security footage painted an ominous picture. But we needed more than circumstantial evidence. Meanwhile, Drew's family and the university organized search parties, scouring the campus and surrounding areas. Volunteers braved the November cold, but there was no trace of her. The sense of urgency was palpable. Hours turned into days, and my team and I followed every lead. On the second day, we discovered Drew's phone records. The last call with Chris hadn't come from the mall parking lot as we assumed. The signal had pinged from a cell tower in Crookston, a town about 30 minutes away. The timeline didn't add up. Drew's car was still at the mall. She couldn't have driven there herself. It was now clear. She hadn't left on her own. She had been taken. Then came the discovery that made my stomach turn. A black shoe one Drew's roommate confirmed belonged to her was found by a riverbank in Crookston. It was as if someone was toying with us, leaving breadcrumbs in the most agonizing way. The location of the shoe, combined with the phone records, confirmed our worst fears. Drew was no longer in control of her fate. With the clock ticking, we turned our attention back to the man in black from the surveillance footage. His movements through the mall, his behavior, it all screamed predator. We pulled every record we could find on men with similar descriptions in the area, narrowing the list to 4 suspects. And then, one name stood out. Alfonso Rodriguez. A man with a violent history, freshly released from prison after serving time for attempted assault and abduction. He lived with his mother in Crookston, the same town where Drew's phone last pinged and her shoe was found. By the end of the 3rd day, we had Rodriguez in for questioning. He claimed he had been at the mall to watch a movie, naming a specific title, but when we checked his story, it fell apart. The movie he mentioned hadn't been playing, not at that theater or anywhere in town. He was lying, and he knew we knew it. Despite the mounting circumstantial evidence, Rodriguez denied any involvement. It wasn't until we searched his car that the pieces started falling into place. A store receipt for a pocket knife, the sheath from which matched the one found near Drew's car. The knife itself was there too, submerged in a bottle of cleaning solution, as if he'd tried to erase its past. We sent the knife to the lab, praying for answers. The results were damning. Traces of blood, a match to Drew. Her DNA was also found on the floor mats of his car. There was no longer any doubt. Alfonso Rodriguez was our suspect. But Drew was still missing. Where had he taken her? And was she still alive? This case had turned into a race against time, a race we couldn't afford to lose. But as the days stretched on and the November cold turned brutal, the hope of finding her alive began to wane. The interrogation room was quiet, save for the rhythmic tapping of my pen on the table. Alfonso Rodriguez sat across from me, his hands clasped tightly together, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere behind me. His demeanor wavered between defiance and silence, a dangerous cocktail of arrogance and fear. The evidence was mounting, and he knew it, but he remained steadfast in his denial. Every second of his silence felt like a taunt. His story about the movie had already crumbled, and the forensic evidence from his car was damning. The knife, soaked in cleaning solution, held Drew's blood. A shoe, confirmed to be hers, had been found near the riverbank in Crookston, not far from his home. But despite these findings, the most critical question remained unanswered. Where was Drew? While Rodriguez refused to talk, the search intensified. The Crookston area became the epicenter of our efforts. Rivers, forests, and abandoned buildings were combed through with painstaking detail. Volunteers, many of them students and faculty from Drew's university, joined law enforcement in the effort. I could see the exhaustion in their faces, but the determination never faltered. Drew had left an indelible mark on her community, and they weren't going to stop searching for her. As the investigation progressed, more of Rodriguez's past came to light. He was no stranger to the system, with a history of violent crimes dating back decades. He had been convicted of attempting to assault women, one of whom had fought him off in her car. His methods were calculated, his intentions chilling. Yet, despite these convictions, he had been released on parole. A bitter anger simmered within me. How could a man with such a violent history be free to walk among the public? We began to piece together his movements leading up to Drew's disappearance. Surveillance footage showed him wandering through the mall, his gait uneven as he leaned on his cane. He wasn't there to shop or dine. His focus was on the people around him. He lingered in stores, his eyes scanning, searching. And then, Drew appeared. Her smile, her vibrant energy, must have made her a target in his twisted mind. He followed her, always keeping a careful distance, but never letting her out of his sight. The evidence painted a horrifying picture. Rodriguez had likely waited until Drew left the mall, watching as she approached her car. The knife sheath found near her vehicle was a stark reminder of how quickly the encounter must have escalated. He had overpowered her, abducting her in her own car and driving to Crookston. What happened after that remained a haunting unknown. The bloodstains in Rodriguez's car, while faint, told us that Drew had been injured. The DNA analysis confirmed our fears. This was no ordinary abduction. It was becoming increasingly clear that this case wouldn't end with a rescue. Still, we pressed on, unwilling to concede defeat. There was a chance, however slim, that Drew might still be alive. Back in the interrogation room, Rodriguez's silence was deafening. I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. "We know what you did, Alfonso. The evidence is there. But this isn't about you anymore. This is about her. Where is she?" He didn't answer. Instead, his lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk, the kind of expression that makes your blood run cold. It wasn't just defiance. It was something darker. I slammed my fist on the table, frustration boiling over, but he remained unfazed. He was playing a game, and he was in no rush to lose. Outside the room, the clock continued to tick. Every hour felt like a lifetime. Search efforts expanded, with drones and cadaver dogs brought in to cover the rugged terrain surrounding Crookston. Snowfall complicated matters, blanketing potential evidence and making remote areas nearly inaccessible. Yet the community's resolve never wavered. They were determined to bring Drew home, one way or another. Despite our efforts, days turned into weeks and hope began to wane. The weight of the case pressed down on all of us, but there was no room for surrender. Drew's family deserved answers, they deserved closure, and Alfonso Rodriguez deserved justice. What he didn't realize, what none of us realized at the time, was that the truth was closer than we imagined, buried beneath the snow, waiting to be uncovered. The snowfall in Crookston was relentless, a white shroud covering the land, burying any trace of what lay beneath. Despite the challenges, our team pressed on, scouring the area for anything that could lead us to Drew. The stakes were higher than ever. Every piece of evidence we found pushed the puzzle closer to completion, but without finding Drew herself, the case remained agonizingly incomplete. We dug deeper into Alfonso Rodriguez's history, peeling back the layers of his life to understand the mind of the man who had brought so much pain to this community. His criminal record read like a chilling dossier of escalating violence. Decades earlier, his first attack had been brazen and violent. A young woman had fought him off in her car as he wielded a knife. It was the kind of encounter that would leave scars on a survivor and should have marked Rodriguez as a man incapable of rehabilitation. Yet, he had been granted parole. That decision had placed him back in the community, in Crookston, living under the supervision of his family, who themselves doubted his readiness to re-enter society. The more we learned, the angrier we became. This wasn't just a crime, it was a failure, a system that had allowed a predator to return unchecked. The forensic evidence we had gathered was overwhelming. Blood traces in Rodriguez's car matched Drew's DNA, as did the blood on the knife submerged in cleaning solution. The sheath found near her car was confirmed to belong to the same knife. Even the shoe found near the riverbank, a harrowing discovery for her loved ones, was irrefutably hers. Rodriguez's lies about his whereabouts and the ludicrous story about watching a non-existent movie only further solidified his guilt. But Rodriguez himself was a master of evasion. Every question in the interrogation room was met with a mixture of defiance, calculated silence, or outright lies. It was a battle of wills, and though he knew he was cornered, he refused to give us the final piece we needed: the location of Drew's body. Without that, the case felt incomplete, the scales of justice unbalanced. Weeks turned into months, and winter deepened. Snow piled up along riverbanks and forests, creating an almost insurmountable barrier for our search teams. Volunteers who had initially come out in droves began to dwindle as fatigue and despair set in. Yet the core team remained steadfast. Drew deserved nothing less. As we waited for the snow to melt, the psychological toll on Drew's family became impossible to ignore. Her parents, visibly drained, still attended every press briefing, pleading with the public for any new information. Her friends and classmates organized vigils, their tearful faces illuminated by candlelight. Even as hope flickered, the community refused to let the memory of Drew fade. Then, in early March, a break came in an unexpected form. The spring thaw began, revealing terrain that had been inaccessible for months. Search efforts resumed with renewed vigor, and finally, on April 17th, the call we had been both dreading and anticipating came through. Drew's body had been found. The scene was harrowing. Her remains lay submerged in the local river, a grim testament to the unimaginable cruelty she had endured. Medical examiners later confirmed what we had feared. Drew had been subjected to horrifying violence. Bruises, stab wounds, and signs of strangulation were all present. The exact cause of death remained unclear, with exposure to the freezing conditions being another possible factor. The timeline suggested she had been alive for several hours after her abduction, a chilling thought that haunted everyone involved in the case. The discovery of Drew's body added a layer of finality to the investigation. It brought answers, yes, but it also brought a new wave of grief for her family and friends. They had clung to the hope, however slim, that she might still be alive. Now, that hope was extinguished. With Drew's body recovered, the focus shifted back to Alfonso Rodriguez. The evidence was now indisputable, and the prosecution was ready to bring the full weight of the law down on him. But the tragedy of Drew's case extended far beyond the courtroom. It sparked a reckoning within the community, and beyond. People began asking how such a predator could have been allowed to walk free, and what could be done to prevent such a failure from happening again. Drew's family, despite their grief, channeled their pain into action. They became vocal advocates for legislative reform, pushing for a national registry of violent offenders. The idea was simple: ensure that the public had access to information about dangerous individuals living in their communities. Their efforts, bolstered by widespread public support, culminated in the passage of a law named in Drew's memory. But even as the law took shape, one question remained. Would it be enough? Could it truly prevent another tragedy like Drew's? These were questions without easy answers, but they were questions that demanded to be asked. As the trial loomed, the weight of Drew's absence was felt in every corner of the community. Her parents prepared themselves for the grueling process ahead, knowing they would have to relive the worst moments of their lives in excruciating detail. For them, justice was no longer just about Rodriguez's punishment. It was about ensuring Drew's legacy, a legacy of kindness, determination, and unyielding love for the people around her. The courtroom awaited, but so did the ghosts of that November night. For now, the focus was on what lay ahead. A fight for justice that would test everyone involved. The courtroom was a battleground, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Alfonso Rodriguez sat at the defense table, flanked by his attorneys, his expression unreadable. For Drew's family, the trial was both a chance for justice and an ordeal they had to endure. Every detail of the case would be laid bare, every piece of evidence scrutinized. The weight of their grief filled the room, but so did their determination. The prosecution began by painting a vivid picture of the night Drew disappeared. They outlined her final movements through the mall, the chilling silence during her phone call with her boyfriend, and the eerie discovery of her abandoned car. Piece by piece, they presented the evidence that had taken months to collect: the blood traces in Rodriguez's car, the knife sheath found near Drew's vehicle, and the DNA on the blade that confirmed her violent end. Each revelation was a blow to the defense's argument, leaving little room for doubt. Witnesses took the stand, their testimonies weaving a narrative of Alfonso Rodriguez as a man with a long history of predatory behavior. Survivors of his past attacks recounted their harrowing experiences, their voices steady but filled with emotion. The courtroom fell silent as they described his methods: the knife, the stalking, the calculated way he chose his victims. Their words highlighted a chilling pattern, one that made it clear Drew's abduction was not an isolated act of violence, but the culmination of years of escalating danger. The defense, however, was relentless. They sought to portray Rodriguez as a man shaped by his troubled upbringing and developmental issues. His attorneys argued that he lacked the cognitive ability to plan such a crime, casting doubt on the prosecution's timeline. They questioned the reliability of the forensic evidence, suggesting it could have been mishandled or contaminated. At every turn, they sought to undermine the overwhelming case against their client. But the prosecution had an ace: the damning surveillance footage from the mall. Clips of Rodriguez lingering near the grocery store, his predatory gaze fixed on young women, played for the jury. The most haunting moment came when the footage showed him following Drew just hours before she vanished. His movements were deliberate, calculated. The evidence was undeniable. As the trial progressed, Drew's parents sat stoically, clutching each other's hands. Her friends and classmates filled the gallery, their presence a silent testament to the impact she had on their lives. But the most gut-wrenching moments came when Drew's mother took the stand. Her voice trembled as she described her daughter's vibrant personality, her aspirations, and the devastating loss the family had endured. Through tears, she implored the jury to see Drew not as a victim but as a person, a young woman, full of life and promise, stolen in the most brutal way. The defense attempted to counter with testimonies about Rodriguez's troubled past. Psychologists detailed his developmental challenges and the hardships he had faced growing up. They painted a picture of a man who had been failed by the system, arguing that society bore some responsibility for the path he had taken. But their arguments did little to sway the jury. The evidence against Rodriguez was too strong, too damning. The trial's climax came when the prosecution unveiled a chilling detail that had remained undisclosed until now: Rodriguez's handwritten notes found during a search of his home. These notes included a list of items related to the crime, as well as cryptic phrases that hinted at his dark intentions. Combined with his prior confession to another inmate, these revelations sealed his fate. The jury deliberated for days, each member grappling with the weight of their decision. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous: guilty on all counts. Alfonso Rodriguez was convicted of Drew's abduction, assault, and murder. The room erupted in emotion, filled with pity for his woman's mother and triumph with the sorrow over the failure of their husband. Tears of relief from Drew's family, quiet satisfaction from the investigators who had spent months piecing the case together. The sentencing phase brought its own challenges. Because the crime spanned multiple states, the federal court had jurisdiction, making Rodriguez eligible for the death penalty. This sparked intense debate. Advocates for capital punishment argued that the heinous nature of the crime warranted the ultimate punishment, while opponents questioned whether the death penalty would bring true closure. In the end, the judge handed down a sentence of death. The decision was met with mixed reactions, but for Drew's family, it was a step toward justice. Still, their journey was far from over. The appeals process would stretch on for years, ensuring Rodriguez remained a focal point of their lives, long after the trial ended. As the courtroom emptied, Drew's parents stood before the media, their voices steady despite the emotion etched on their faces. They spoke not of vengeance but of the need for systemic change. They called for stricter parole regulations, better oversight of violent offenders, and more resources for victims' families. Their advocacy was not just for Drew, but for every family who had suffered a similar loss. The trial had brought some measure of closure, but it also left lingering questions. Could this tragedy have been prevented? How many others like Alfonso Rodriguez were walking free? These were questions that demanded answers, and Drew's family vowed to find them. For now, they returned home, carrying with them the weight of the past, but also the hope of creating a safer future. Their fight was not over, but neither was their resolve. Drew's legacy would live on, not just in their memories, but in the changes they fought to bring about. The courtroom had fallen silent, the verdict delivered, and Alfonso Rodriguez sentenced to death. For Drew's family and friends, the conclusion of the trial marked the end of one chapter, but opened another. One of reflection, healing, and action. Justice had been served. Yet the void left by Drew's absence remained an unfillable chasm in the lives of those who loved her. In the days following the trial, Drew's parents turned their grief into a mission. They established a foundation in her memory, focused on advocating for systemic reform to prevent similar tragedies. Their first goal was to address the glaring flaws in the justice system that allowed dangerous offenders like Rodriguez to roam free after serving time. They rallied lawmakers, victims advocates, and community leaders, pushing for stricter parole policies and better monitoring of released offenders. The foundation also spearheaded the creation of educational programs aimed at raising awareness about personal safety, particularly for young women. Workshops, self-defense classes, and awareness campaigns were rolled out in schools and universities across the country, empowering students to recognize and respond to potential dangers. Through these efforts, Drew's story became a powerful tool for change, her memory a beacon of hope in a landscape shadowed by fear. The passage of Drew's Law was one of the family's proudest achievements. Signed into federal legislation in the summer of 2007, the law established a national registry for violent offenders, accessible to the public. For the first time, communities could access information about individuals convicted of serious crimes, giving them the tools to protect themselves and their loved ones. Drew's parents stood alongside the president during the signing ceremony, their bittersweet smiles masking the pain that had driven their fight. But the journey was far from over. In 2021, nearly 2 decades after Drew's murder, her family faced an unexpected blow. A federal judge overturned Rodriguez's death sentence, citing evidence of developmental challenges and procedural flaws in his original trial. For Drew's family, the decision felt like a betrayal, reopening old wounds and forcing them to relive the nightmare they had fought so hard to move past. Yet even in the face of this setback, they refused to give up. The family channeled their frustration into renewed advocacy, highlighting the need for judicial reform to ensure that victims' voices were not drowned out by legal technicalities. Public support for their cause swelled, with communities across the nation rallying behind their fight for justice. Amid the turmoil, Drew's legacy continued to shine. Her university established a scholarship in her name, awarded annually to students who demonstrated exceptional talent in the arts and a commitment to community service. Qualities Drew embodied. In her hometown, a memorial garden was dedicated to her memory, a serene space where visitors could reflect on her life and the impact she had on those around her. For her family, the garden became a place of solace. They often visited, planting flowers Drew had loved, and sharing stories about her vibrant personality and boundless kindness. It was here, surrounded by nature's quiet beauty, that they found moments of peace amid the chaos. Through the years, Drew's story inspired countless individuals to take action, from volunteering at local shelters to advocating for legislative change. Her memory became a rallying cry for those determined to create a safer, more just society. She was more than a victim. She was a symbol of resilience, compassion, and the enduring power of love. In March 2023, Rodriguez was resentenced to life imprisonment without parole, finally putting an end to the long and arduous legal battle. For Drew's family, the ruling brought mixed emotions. Relief that he would never walk free, but frustration that the death penalty had been overturned. They chose to focus on what mattered most, ensuring no other family would have to endure what they had. As Drew's parents looked back on their journey, they saw a legacy shaped not by tragedy, but by transformation. Their daughter's life had touched so many, and her death had sparked a movement that would continue to save lives for generations to come. Drew's laughter, her kindness, her creativity, they lived on in the hearts of everyone who remembered her. Standing before a crowd at a charity gala organized in Drew's honor, her mother addressed the audience with a steady voice. Drew's life was stolen, but her spirit is untouchable. Through her memory, we've learned the strength of unity and the importance of action. Together, we can create a world where stories like hers become a thing of the past. The room erupted in applause, a testament to the lasting impact of one remarkable young woman and the family who refused to let her light fade. As the evening came to a close, Drew's parents stepped into the cool night air, their hearts heavy but hopeful. They knew their work was far from over, but they also knew they were not alone. Drew's story had become a part of something greater, a movement for justice, compassion, and change. And in that movement, her memory would forever remain alive.